Support for Docs Outside the Box comes from Set for Life Insurance. Set for Life means set for less. Their clients get access to the largest portfolio of discounts and unisex rates available nationwide. Check them out at setforlifeinsurance.com and tell them Dr. Darko sent you.
So it does. It comes down to priorities. It comes down to, at the end of the day, and not the day, at the end of my career, and I look back, what is it that I'm going to value? It's not going to be 5 more shifts a month so I can make an extra, few $1,000s. It's these experiences like trekking on Antarctica and being out there for the F1 races and being a part of these other things. Those are the highlights. When I look back over the years, those are the things I remember.
Welcome to Docs Outside the Box podcast. This is your official show, looking inside the minds of cutting edge and innovative doctors. Think you'll find these stories in any medical textbook? Sorry, you're getting real life insight from men and women pushing the envelope beyond medicine. Ordinary doctors doing extraordinary things. Let's start now with your host, Dr. Darko.
What's good, everyone? This is Dr. Nee. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Docs Outside the Box. I'm really excited to talk about this topic and have this guest on my show. This one is going to be mainly about getting outside of your comfort zone, learning to live your life and be fully present in your life. And what I mean by that is getting off the fence, taking action on whatever dreams that you have right now, and stop waiting until it becomes so perfect or waiting until you retire before you take action. And on this episode, I'm going to chat with a physician who is splitting his time between his medical practice, as well as spending time literally on expeditions that go all the way down to Antarctica. And then also at the same time, he's also providing medical coverage or medical care to people who are racing cars, racing motorcycles in his hometown. My next guest, his name is Dr. Nicholas Steinour, and he is trained in emergency medicine, and he's currently practicing in Austin, Texas. Now, his mantra, words that he lives his life by, is enjoy the things that make you fully present in life. And after listening to this episode, trust me, without a doubt, you're going to see that he's definitely living a life outside the box. You're going to hear about how he became part of a team of physicians that provide medical support to expeditions in the South Pole. And we're going to talk about all the things that you don't really see as a normal practicing physician, but things that you see when you go down there, like how the hell do you take care of someone who got bitten by a seal? Seasickness, and of course, hypothermia. And not only that, he's also combined his love of medicine with his childhood passion for motorcycles and going at high speeds, because now he's also providing medical care to various racing circuits that are in Texas. It's going to be a great episode for learning how to get out of your comfort zone, from making calculated decisions to living your life in the now and not just for retirement. As always, tell others about this episode, share with others, give this episode a thumbs up, give this episode a rating. And without further ado, I present Dr. Nicholas Steinour. Dr. Nicholas Steinour, welcome to Docs Outside the Box. What's up? What's good?
Not much. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be a part of this. And thank you for taking the time to come and hear my story. And hopefully I can be inspirational to others.
Well, when we did the pre-interview, I was just learning about your life. And I was like, man, I'm really jealous about your life. And I was like, all right, well, if I'm really jealous about your life, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more other people who are going to be interested in learning about your lifestyle. So, we got a lot to go through, but obviously I have you on the show because truly you're living, as a doc outside the box. So let's take a couple of steps back before we let people know exactly what you're doing. Let's learn more about, your medical school training, where you currently practice at, and then we'll kind of just parse all those other details out.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in Pennsylvania. I went to medical school in Miami and trained at Duke in North Carolina. And now I'm currently practicing in Austin, Texas, where I'm training site for the emergency medicine residency program.
Okay. So it sounds like we've kind of crisscrossed paths. I didn't grow up in Pennsylvania, but I currently practice in Pennsylvania. I went to undergrad in Pennsylvania, and then I did some trauma training in Miami. So I don't know if maybe some form or fashion, we may have crossed paths or something like that, looked across each other at a foggy room or something like that.
I called you at night. Yeah.
Yeah. But this is awesome. So you're an emergency room physician. The reason I have you on the show is because you have basically traveled to places that the majority of people have never been to. You've been to Antarctica. You also are a doctor on the motorsports, I guess like F1, GP sports track. I don't even know how to describe it, but basically you do things that ordinary doctors don't get a chance to do. We want to hear more about it. We want to learn more about that life.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of opportunities have sort of fallen into my lap. I came to Austin because it was the coolest city in the world. 2 years after I got here, they started building a Formula One track. And one of my main interests outside of medicine, and maybe why I'm in emergency medicine, is I enjoy risk-taking behavior. I enjoy adrenaline, and motorsports is something I've gravitated towards. So I've got...
Are you sure your disability insurance? You sure they want to know? Did you put that?
So yes, anybody who's interested in these sort of things, please talk to your family about it. I did have to up my life insurance as well as disability to get my wife on board with these activities.
You've always been a risk taker, right? So was that always your mindset even before medical school?
It was actually. And, I never really thought I would be a doctor. I kind of initially thought I might be a garbage collector, but I couldn't whistle. So that was off the table. And then I really enjoyed baseball. So I was going to be a baseball card salesman. And then I really wasn't sure. And I got into college and I just enjoyed anything that kind of got your heart rate up, made you feel present. And that's really one of the things for me is, when do you feel present? Because there's so many distractions out there with technology and Instagram and the fear of missing out, which a lot of our millennials talk about now. And for me, the most enjoyment, the most alive sense I get is when I'm doing things that make me fully present. I think that's one of the common themes when I look at all the things that I do is just that. It's how are you fully present? And when you're on a motorcycle doing 160, 180 miles an hour on a track, you really can't be distracted. And to me, that's invigorating. It grounds me. It really is therapeutic because it allows me to clear my head. And after a stressful day, a stressful week at work, to be able to go out on a Sunday to a Formula One track, a MotoGP track, and just, let it hang out there is really something that allows me to come back refreshed and focused on the work I do.
I'm really interested. When did you first get on a motorcycle and what was that like?
I don't know if I should disclose this, but when I was 4, I started riding dirt bikes. Yeah.
Okay, so you got introduced early.
Yeah, so it's in the genetics, I guess. So my whole family kind of is not to the extent that I've kind of taken it to the extreme, but I did get on dirt bikes starting at age 4. And then intermittently throughout high school, I've been on different motorcycles. And then I came across a racing bike out of Italy and got that. That's been my sort of obsession in the past 3 or 4 years now.
Once you got into medical school, once you graduated and you've become a physician, did you find it hard trying to balance, being present with being a physician, being an ER doc, the shifts, taking care of patients, the daily grind? It's easier said than done. How did you do it?
Yeah. So my wife keeps me honest, and periodically I'll be at work kind of doing the daily grind that we all go through. And I will be in the shower or staring in the mirror and realize I'm just not giving it 100% right now. What's off? And it's usually a balance. It's I'm working too much or I'm perseverating on X, Y, or Z. And it requires me to think about what's really important. And am I giving enough attention to those things? Am I taking care of myself? Am I sleeping well? Am I exercising? When's the last time I've done something to really go out there and be present? Or am I getting caught up kind of in the day-to-day that the work demands that most of us do? And that's usually when I sort of reset and say, okay, what do I need to do? And then I start working towards that. And a lot of folks that I talk to, they talk about, hey, one day I want to go and do this. One day I want to go and do that. But one day never actually comes. And I think one of the main differentiators is if you can take that the next step and say, hey, one day I want to go to Antarctica. All right, how do I do that? And what day is that? It can't just be one day and then a year from now. It's one day in 2018 and let's make it December. Well, now I've got a very concrete goal and I can work towards that and I can make that happen. And I make myself accountable for that. And I tell others who then say, hey, are you still doing that in December? And if I say no, I better have an excuse. And that way I can't just keep kicking that can down the road. And that's what's allowed me to accomplish a lot. And I continue to use that and I teach others to set those same goals so that they can actually accomplish things and not just sort of talk about what if.
Tell us about this being a physician in Antarctica. So you're with expeditions. Let's unpiece. Let's talk about all this. Let's put it out there. Like, how are you doing this? Like, what exactly are you doing? When did you get introduced? How can other doctors find out about this? Keeping notes. Like, let's learn more about this. What kind of doctoring do you do when you're down in Antarctica?
Yeah, great question. These were all the questions I had when I heard about it. So I'm an avid traveler and I've had a goal ever since I graduated high school I went to Australia and played some rugby over the summer as an exchange student. I thought, this travel thing's really cool. And, it was St. Augustine who said the world is a book and those who do not travel read only one page. And I thought, wow, there's really something to that.
That's pretty deep.
Yeah. So I decided I want to travel. I've got the ability to travel. Let's do it. And let's not wait till I'm retired to do it. Let's do it now. So I can go out and surf in Bali and I can go and, hike mountains. And Antarctica came up as this, how do you get there? It's very expensive. And I thought there's got to be another way. So I started talking to some other doctors who were inclined with sort of travel and happened to be in my field. And they introduced me to these groups that go down there. And the way it works, you send them your CV, you send them kind of what you've done, and you give them availability and you get on a list. And I got selected. And the role is I'm medical support for these expeditions that go down. And what I do is really take care of the other passengers on the ship. So that's a lot of motion sickness. It is a lot of stay hydrated, don't drink too much, be cautious when you're out walking around. If there's been waves splashing over the boat, don't go out and try to jog, really hold on to the rails and be careful. And when we get to Antarctica, make sure you're bundled up, make sure you're waterproof, be aware of wind. There's wildlife out there. So we had a seal bite the last time I went. I don't know any book that talks about how to treat seal bites. So
Right.
I assumed it was like any other animal bite. Don't close it. Give them any antibiotics you can find and hope for the best, right? So those are some of the things I got to do. And, allergic reactions, things of that nature, falls. So you've got some orthopedic injuries that occur. Fortunately, nobody fell into the water and had any hypothermia issues. But those are kind of the things that are expected. And the trade-off there is I get to go and I was able to take my wife. So we got to go and kind of make a quasi-vacation out of this.
How long is that trip in totality?
So it varies. So the first time I went, it was 3.5 weeks and we retraced Shackleton's expedition, which is fascinating if you ever get a chance. There's a book called Endurance out there. And I recommend that if you want to kind of learn about leadership and real heroism.
So are you taking off from South America or?
Yeah. Ushuaia is the furthest city south and it's in Argentina. And from there, we take a boat across the Drake Strait and then we go down to Antarctica. And depending on weather, there's different places you go on the Antarctic Peninsula and into Antarctica. And then some of the trips also then go up towards the Falkland Islands and over towards South Georgia.
What was it like going on your first expedition? Obviously, like you said, there's nothing that can prepare you for a seal bite or were you nervous? Talk to us about that feeling of just getting on that boat and realizing you are the only person who can take care of these people for thousands of miles.
So it's even worse than that. You get on the boat and it's really a fake it till you make it, right? So the first day we got on, they said, hey, Dr. Steinour, we'd like you to introduce yourself and kind of talk about the trip and what to expect. It was my first time to Antarctica. I had no idea what to expect. right? So I stood up there and I kind of gave a little bio of myself and tried to do some reassuring. And then I got really vague on the details of what we were going to anticipate and expect because I wasn't sure myself. And to me, that's part of it, right? I mean, that's getting outside of your comfort zone is what allows you to be more comfortable in more situations.
Yeah, and I agree with that.
So it was great. I was standing up there. My wife was just laughing because she knew everything I was saying was really just hypothetical. It ended up working out fine. I answered questions. So when in doubt, ask questions and then let them ask you questions and try to answer them as vaguely as you can with not misleading. So that was kind of how it went. And I had no idea what to expect, but I knew I was prepared. I was trained well. And, specifically in emergency medicine, you never know what's going to walk through the door every day. So I wasn't really afraid of it, but I was definitely excited and curious to see what was going to come.
So since that first inaugural trip, how many times have you been back down to Antarctica or have done many of these expeditions?
That was in 2016 and I've gone since. So I've done a couple now. And I continue to do it. I try to go every year if my schedule permits for one trip. Yeah.
Now, is this something that is basically you get free room and board or do they actually pay you to come along or how does that work?
They allow me to take a guest and that's all covered. They don't pay me additionally. They cover the cost of the trip for my medical support.
Okay. So now that you do that, what was the most difficult part of just getting acclimated to, being down in Antarctica? Was there, obviously there are things that you can't prepare for, but obviously your training is there. But was there anything that you're just whoa, I really am not prepared for this? And this is something that I should let other people know about?
So when I went, they asked me, do you have malpractice insurance? I said, are they going to sue me under Antarctic law? How does that work? So I didn't have insurance. I'll tell you the biggest surprise, not necessarily something I wasn't prepared for, but the biggest surprise, and I found this also when covering for F1, is really the international expectation of what a doctor is going to do for me. When you go into a hospital, there's sort of an expectation. You come in, you're likely to get an IV, they're going to draw some blood, they're going to run a bunch of tests, there's probably going to be some imaging done. And that's kind of the American model, and it's not the international model. Internationally, it's if you do a good history and physical, and you say, I think you are fine, you don't have pneumonia, there's no expectation that you need an x-ray to confirm that. And I think I've brought that back to my practice. And I think that was one of the biggest surprises of that trip is because there's a lot of international travelers. They don't have the same expectation that the American patients do. And I actually share that experience with some patients when I feel like their expectations are more than what I'm deeming necessary at the bedside when I practice back here in the States. And that's been something that if you haven't seen it and you go travel international, stop by a doctor's office, stop in at a hospital, just kind of look around because it can really shed some light on what you're doing and kind of give your perspective a little more enrichment. And there's other ways to do it besides the way we do it, which tends to be very heavy on testing and diagnostics and cost.
You know, I really agree with that. So I do a medical mission trip every year. Me and my wife go to Ghana. I do general surgery. My wife does OB. Whenever we come back, people always ask what it's like, you know, what's the experience like? What should they expect? And I tell them all the time that it's as close to a professional reboot as you can have for a whole bunch of different reasons. Like you said, it like the H&Ps are most important. For example, like I took out an appendix on a 14-year-old, you know, and what do we normally do in the United States? I take out the appendix and I pass it along the field and we send it to pathology. You know, in where I practice at, you know, what they do is they put it into a formalin, they put it into a little jar, they put a little sticker onto it and they give it to the patient. And it's the patient's responsibility next to take it to a pathologist and pay to get this evaluated. Majority of the time, they may not have the money or the funds to get that testing. So when I am taking the appendix out, people are looking at me like, why do you want to get this testing? Like, are you suspicious of anything? And I'm just like, no, but you know, in my mind, I'm like, I literally don't have a rationale to do this. That's what we always do in the United States. You know, I definitely agree with what you're saying. And I always bring back something whenever I come back, you know, from these medical humanitarian trips. So what you just said was definitely right on point.
Yeah, the professional reboot. I'm going to use that phrase again. Thank you for that.
It's true, right? I mean, just from a pain standpoint, the things that people in different countries can withstand from a surgical standpoint compared to patients here in the United States. I don't mean to compare and contrast, but it's really different. You know, so you start to really think about like, do I really need all of these opioids to really treat this? You know, so that's why I say it's as close to a professional reboot as possible. But let's transition from the cold of Antarctica to the track of motorsport. Like, how did you get involved with that? And we'd like to learn more about that. How does that work?
So I've always had a fascination with cars. And when I was ending residency, I was in North Carolina, and my soon-to-be father-in-law suggested that I go and check out a track called VIR, Virginia International Raceway. So I went up there with the BMW club and got my first taste of track driving, and it's been downhill ever since. So from there, that was sort of the seed, and it grew rather quickly, and I got involved with different clubs as far as getting out on tracks, and I've done some schools with a couple of the European auto clubs. And then I came to practice here in Austin, and it really came to me. I got here in 2010, and in 2012 was the first Formula One race in America in many years. And it happened to be in my backyard. And when they were building it, one of my colleagues, one of my partners, had reached out to the track and said, hey, when you guys have events here, you're going to need medical support. Consider us. We've got a big group of emergency physicians who would be willing to help out. So when that continued to...
You're just cheesing at this moment.
I know. I was like, this is perfect. How do I get involved? So I put my name on the short list very early. And I'm part of the team that goes out there to do all the events at Circuit of the Americas. So F1, of course, is the headliner, and that happens once a year. MotoGP comes, Le Mans comes. We've had the Super V8s come for a while. We even had X Games show up for several years when they were down here. So to be able to be at the track, to be able to see behind the scenes, to take care of, interestingly, the drivers tend not to get injured. It's usually the support. So the pit crews, they get their feet run over, or there's a burn, or, you know, things you wouldn't necessarily expect. You're expecting, the crash where somebody, gets obliterated against the wall and you have to extract them. That's rare.
Well, I mean, when you see it on TV,
exactly.
Wear helmets. You're like, wait, what's going on here, guys?
Yeah, it's no joke because anything can happen. We had some gas fires inside the pits, so they've had to change rules. There's a lot of learning that goes with it. But it's been fascinating to be someone who loves to drive and be part of that, to then see the behind the scenes and be part of the medical support. It's just given me a whole new perspective on it.
Just coming from a 30,000 foot view, do you feel like your medical career now is kind of going, or your schedule, it goes around like this type of lifestyle? Or because I would have to think that you'd have to be able to have some free time, to be able to schedule in these things, to go to Antarctica, to be able to come to these races. It's really interesting. I'd like to know how you schedule all that stuff in.
Yeah. So if my group's listening, I prioritize my work here at the hospital above everything else. To those,
depending on the reach of Docs Outside the Box, hopefully
correct.
Your colleagues do reach this, right? Or hear this.
Yes. So, with my specialty, there is inherent flexibility if you make it. And I happen to be the medical director as well. So there's some administrative time that's flexible. I do have a clinical load, but it is not the same as somebody running their own clinic where they have to be there 5 days a week. But it does take some prioritization. There's always give and takes, sacrifices that have to be made to make sure that you can do these things. I get the schedule as far in advance as I can so that I can request off those days to ensure that I'm able to do these other things that really make my work that much more interesting. So it does. It comes down to priorities. It comes down to, at the end of the day, and not the day, at the end of my career, and I look back, what is it that I'm going to value? It's not going to be 5 more shifts a month so I can make an extra, few $1,000s. It's these experiences like trekking on Antarctica and being out there for the F1 races and being a part of these other things. Those are the highlights. When I look back over the years, those are the things I remember. There's work that I do. There's remarkable cases at the hospital, but an extra couple of shifts a month are not going to make my life better. It's doing the other things that really make it enriching and keep me wanting to come back to do the work that I do.
I love that, actually. I'm really glad that you shared that with us. For the people who are listening right now, the audience who are listening, the medical students, even some young attendings who are just like, man, I want that life. Can you give us some concrete, first steps? How do they contact these companies or anything that you can offer so that they can kind of start that process of maybe going down the same path as you?
So the first thing is do it. And I think that's
I love that part. Yeah.
Self-limitations tend to be the biggest limitations. It's, yeah, I'd like to do that, but, well, if it's important to you, you've got to remove the but. And there are steps you can take. The first is say yes to anything and everything that comes your way. So if your goal is to, travel the world with a tour company, you're probably not going to get your dream job right off the bat. But there's small things you can do that make you more interesting and a better candidate for those positions when they come available.
I like that point.
Mission trips, getting your resume strong enough to show I've got experience in international medicine. I've got experience in whatever it is you're looking to do. If it's track support, find a local car club and say, let me just hang out with you guys and be around. Because then if one of the bigger clubs comes to you, or if you go and seek them out, you can say, hey, I've done support for these guys for the past 7 or 8 events, and it's gone well. They can be a reference for you. Well, now if you are compared with somebody else, you've at least got some experience in this. And the reality is, what I found is the world gets really small when you get really specific. So there's not many people who happen to be doctors who want to go to Antarctica and can take off several weeks at a time to do it.
Yeah, I like that.
So if you're one of those people, it's a short list. Statistically, you're likely to get it if you are persistent.
I really like that point. It's a really, really good point. Let me ask you a question, though. Being on the motorsports and seeing what, the accidents that occur there, and I'm sure everybody's very gracious. Obviously, same thing with Antarctica. Have you ever thought about, how they look at us as physicians compared to how it normally we're looked at as physicians from a patient standpoint? Do they look at us any differently, or?
I think in a moment of crisis, you're always a welcomed presence. And yes, I think it is different. It's more respect. They're there because they need you at that time and they recognize they don't have options. When you're on Antarctica, you're 3-day evacuation from anyone else. So you're all they've got. And that bond is pretty powerful. And it's really interesting to connect in those times. They're not common, but when they happen, it really is a deep, profound reminder of what it is to be human and the vulnerability that comes with that. I think it's absolutely a privilege to be able to be someone who can serve in that capacity.
Have you ever had to, life flight someone back from, Antarctica back to like the nearest, I guess, continent, would be like South America, I guess? And that's
some of my colleagues have. I got close. We had a lady who I felt like needed some further assistance. And I can remember running across the Falkland Islands looking for the closest. There was a medical clinic there. And they said, they might have some things there. So I said, well, let me run over there. So, I'm out there in my snow boots and it's about 3/4 of a mile down. I'm running down there and I go banging on the door, hoping that the doctor's in there. And he comes and he's in his pajamas, but he comes to the door and I talk to him. I said, hey, here's what I've got. What do you guys have? He goes, well, we have a C-arm. Would that help? So we had a portable x-ray machine. And I
wasn't expecting that, right?
I know. I was like, well, that's better than nothing. But it really reminded me of how lucky we are in America specifically to have ample resources all the time, seemingly. In many places we don't. So that was as close as I got. We ended up managing a lot of talking to the patient, the family, as well as our captain of the ship as far as what we need to do next. And we were coordinating an evacuation if needed. But no, fortunately, knock on wood, I have not had to do an emergency evacuation from there yet.
That's good. That's good.
I'm headed back in 2 weeks, so hopefully that'll continue.
I think I just jinxed you now. Then, dang it, my bad.
Yes, thank you for that.
You got to make sure you write back to us to let us know.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, what's next for you, Doc? I mean, obviously, what you do on the track, what you do in Antarctica, that's probably a lifetime of work for someone else, right? But is there any new challenges that you're thinking of that you want to do?
So always, I get bored quickly, which is why I do what I do, I believe. And
jumping out of planes, maybe, or something.
Right. Done that. So to my,
I love it. I love it.
To my earlier point, I think when you make yourself available, opportunities present themselves if you look for them. And on my last trip to Antarctica, there was a gentleman who happens to run a trekking expedition in Nepal. And he approached me via email several months ago and said, hey, we have a fairly large group that goes on this trek to Nepal. It's about a 14-day trek to base camp. And we would really appreciate some medical support. Is that something you'd be interested in doing? And this is just one example of the things that once you kind of get into these areas of interest, other doors continue to just open themselves. And you almost have to say, what am I not going to do? I mean, eventually I got to come back and do some work to be able to go and do these other ventures. But yeah, what's next is always the question. Every couple months, I kind of keep a log of things I haven't done yet that I'd like to do. And then it's just a matter of how important is it? Do I have competing interests that take priority now? And once you rise to the top of that list, it's not a matter of if, it's just how. And I sort of put my mind to it and reach out to all the contacts I have. And fortunately, I've been able to accomplish a lot. And I think anybody who has that sort of determination can do the same.
If I could put the spotlight on you, if I could put a little bit of pressure on you, what is the one thing that you really want to do that you're just like, I don't know, but let's hear it. If you could.
So I'll tell you, I'm enamored by SpaceX, which is just 100 miles north of here.
You want to go to Mars?
No, not Mars. No, but if Elon Musk is
you're not
out
coming
there
back.
listening,
Yeah, you're not coming back. Yeah.
but with this tourism or with orbiting, that would be something that I might be interested in, but haven't thought hard enough about yet. But that would be pretty cool.
If you did, man, you got to come back on the show.
Absolutely.
That's really cool, man. Well, Doc, we're getting towards the end of the interview. I just want to ask you some quick fast fire questions. You just let me know what comes off the top of your head, okay?
Okay.
So look, if we could parse this down to one pretty much topic, one idea, one point for this podcast, what's the one thing that you want people to take away from this podcast?
If you put your mind to it, you can do it. And when I look back at all the things I've done, if you had asked me 10 years ago, would I do any of these things? I would say, that seems like a fat chance. I doubt it. It's just been amazing. And I think it's truly, we limit ourselves more than others limit us.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think if you can kind of really reflect on that and think about what it is you want to do and the things you're not doing now, why not? When you really start to dig into it, the answers are not prohibitive. You can overcome those barriers pretty easily.
I love it. I love that answer. Knowing what you know now, and you basically kind of already answered this already, but knowing what you know now, if you got a chance to go back in a DeLorean, see yourself as a pre-med, what kind of advice would you give yourself?
Don't be so cocky.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah, when I first became, my wife reminds me of this a lot. I think as you get those credentials behind your name and you start realizing you have some skills, you can let that go to your head a little bit. And I've definitely humbled myself over the years, but coming out, I felt like I knew everything and everybody else could learn from me and how wrong I was. So I'm learning a whole lot about others and a lot of things that I don't know. So yeah, that's the cycle, right? The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know.
I think that's the fun part too. Also, just discovering.
It is, absolutely, yeah.
Agree with you on that one. Okay, what's one personal habit that has helped you become more successful? Obviously, get down to Antarctica, all the things that you're doing right now, or has helped you become like a doc outside the box?
I think self-reflection and eliminating distraction. So I actually, sadly, I don't have any social media presence because I was on Facebook years ago and I realized I was spending a lot of time on it and I wasn't getting the return on investment. So I've gotten off that and I've really tried to focus on being present at least a part of every day. And that's really given me a lot of satisfaction and joy. It's allowed me to really have meaningful relationships with friends, family, and my kids. And it allows me to then have seemingly more time to go and do these other outside the box type activities.
I love it. Is there someone that you find inspirational that, you know, you wouldn't mind trading places with for 24 hours?
Oh, for 20. That's a good one. Ernest Shackleton is an inspiration to me. His journey from Antarctica was just amazing and his leadership skills were phenomenal, but he's obviously somebody who's antiquated now.
I'm going to put myself out there. I'm not too familiar. Can you give us a little bit of a brief synopsis on him? And
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So he was a polar explorer out of England. And at the turn of the century, at the early 1900s, was doing a lot of exploration around Antarctica. And he had a failed mission to cross Antarctica. They got frozen and spent 2 winters basically frozen in Antarctica. And they pulled a lifeboat out, got to Elephant Island, and then went to South Georgia and left the bulk of his crew on Elephant Island, which is just a tiny little remote island in the middle of nowhere. They were able to get to a whaling station, the 4 that left to go to South Georgia, and they went back and rescued the entire team. And miraculously, not a single person died.
Wow.
And it was just absolutely incredible. It was his leadership, sort of, he coached up these people who thought they couldn't do it and made them do it. And it's one of those stories that almost seems fictional when you read it because it's just that unbelievable of a story.
What years are we talking? Are we talking like early 1900s?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
Wow. I got to definitely read up on that. I love that.
Yeah.
It's a really good story. What's one life hack or even just a piece of technology that you're using right now that makes your life easier?
Well, I would say I have a track app that allows me to record data with G-force, inputs on braking and steering. And that's really made my driving skills that much better.
What's the fastest you've ever driven?
On a motorcycle, it was 181. That's on a racetrack. It's perfectly legal.
Wow.
In a car, it's 168, and that was on the Autobahn in Germany.
Man, I would love to go on the Autobahn, actually.
Yes, it is. It's an amazing thing, especially it's humbling when you're passed by a station wagon with a family in the back and you're doing 130 and you're being...
Are you serious?
Yeah, that was an eye-opener.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, look, Dr. Nick, I want to ask you this one last question. This is a question that I ask to all of my guests, and I want you to complete it. It's, Dr. Nick, I'm not just a doc. I'm an
adventure seeker.
Boom, right there. That's the perfect answer right there. You got it. I haven't had that one before, so I love that answer. Overall, I just want to say thank you very much for coming on this show. I think your lifestyle and your life is really, truly outside the box. And I know when I first heard about this through someone else who introduced us via email. And as you were talking, I just said, wow, I really would love to have you on the show to talk about a couple of things. One is, like you just talked about, your lifestyle and where you go. I think that's really interesting. But I think more importantly, like you said, is your mindset, right? And being able to, basically detach from social media and just be present. And I think that's allowed you to be very successful. And I just wanted to acknowledge you for that, as well as what you do on an everyday basis with taking care of patients. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you. And, I think it's one of those things that if you put your mind to it, you can do it. And thank you for allowing me to be here and sharing my story, because I think it's one of those things that it saddens me when I see colleagues say they're burnt out with medicine and they can't do this and they're not happy, because you have the ability to be very happy and you've got a skill set that's completely portable and allows you to do a lot of things that others couldn't dream of doing.